Hello, SOCA1010 students. Welcome to week 8 of the course. So this week we're focusing on ethnicity, multiculturalism, and refugees. And I'll note as well, my lecture for this week is a little bit shorter than it would typically be, and that's because we're leaving some time this week for you to take a look at a library module that we've put together for you. So now that you've received the feedback from your LREP, you've hopefully identified some areas where you've done quite well, and then maybe some other areas where there's a bit of room for improvement. So for many of you, there'll be, a little bit of room for some extra work to be done in relation to identifying really good quality resources. And so that's the focus of the library module that we've put together in liaison with some of our fantastic library staff. So I'll show you at the end of this lecture where to find that module, but essentially I would anticipate that some of the material in the module will be things that some of you would already know. So if there's material in there that you're already very familiar with, please feel free to skip over it and focus on areas and information that you're less familiar with. So really, I'd like to encourage you to take what's useful to you from this module and skip over anything that's less useful, because you're all going to be coming from slightly different places in terms of your kind of knowledge and background around the kind of techniques and information that you need to find good quality resources. But just in general, even if you did quite well on the LRAP, and in general the LRAPs were really quite good, we were happy with them. Even if you did quite well on it, I would still very strongly encourage you to at least take a look at the module, because there still might be some aspects of the kind of search strategies that are recommended, or some of the information about finding resources that will be useful to you. And from the perspective of a first year course, this is information that you can carry with you throughout your degree and even beyond that. So it's a really good use of your time at this particular point to get really familiar with the library, the resources available, and especially the kind of techniques you can use to find really good quality resources, and especially techniques you can use to essentially more quickly filter through the resources and more quickly find those that are actually going to be relevant to you, rather than having to go through pages and pages of kind of semi-relevant but not tremendously helpful material. So yes, so I'll touch on that again and show you where to find that at the end of this lecture, but for now, let's get right into the material for this week. So I thought I'd start by talking to you a little bit about the concept of race before we move on to talk about ethnicity, because I think concepts of race and ethnicity are often used interchangeably in everyday conversation, but they do mean slightly different things. And I think it's important to pin that down before we continue on talking about these concepts more generally. So the concept of race raises some rather complex questions, even in contemporary sociology. And for a definition, race specifically refers to physically perceptible differences between groups of people, so differences on the basis of physical appearance. However, it's important to keep in mind that from a sociological and anthropological perspective, at least, the scientific basis of race is contested. So quite famously, the American Anthropological Association put out a statement on race in 1993, and they stated that they didn't accept that there was a scientific basis for race that was particularly useful for understanding race in the contemporary world. And that was on the basis that genetically there's more difference within so-called racial groups than there is between racial groups, or more variation would be the correct way to say that, I think. So it was on that basis that they contested the kind of scientific basis or reality of race. And this is not necessarily a kind of settled thing, but I think it's really important to be kind of specific about what we are doing here in sociology, and what we're doing in sociology, to kind of take you back to the definitions that we discussed in the first week of the course, is that we're focusing on social behavior, the impact of one person's behavior on another's, the impact of ideas and interaction. So we're really interested in the social meaning of things. We're not so much interested in the biological reality, or lack of reality of certain things. That's not really the focus of our points of study. So that's really neither here nor there for us in a way. So I think when we're looking at the concept of race in a sociological course, it's important to I think treat race as something that is socially constructed and socially constituted, because for our kinds of approaches to study, it is. We're interested in the social meaning and constitution of race. So really the focus of our approach to race is on how ideas about and perceptions of race shape social behavior. So that's what we're interested in when we talk about race, and we talk about related concepts in sociology and anthropology. However, I think it's important to make the point that although there's debate about the kind of scientific validity of the notion of race, that's really not to say that that the experience of race, or the to extrapolate from that, the experience of racism is not valid, or is not real, or anything like that. I think from what you've kind of come across in this course so far, what we've covered in this course so far, you've probably got quite a strong sense of the fact that social ideas and the social distinctions that we make are very much real in the way that they impact on our lives, and they shape our experiences in the world. So race and racism is very much kind of real and very, very relevant on this basis. And so I think it's important to kind of touch on what exactly is meant by racism. So just to put forward a general definition, racism occurs when generally mainstream people or social structures systematically discriminate between persons on the basis of moral judgments about race that are based on their perceived physical characteristics, and which flow over into ideas about what kind of people they are. So we can see some very overt examples of this in the two cases I have here on the slides, the denial of service on the basis of race. So these are kind of older examples, but we can see echoes of them in some implicit approaches to race, and obviously some continuing very explicit approaches to race, which are very racist. So that's the kind of definition of, well, the understandings of race and racism that we're using here. And then if we're thinking about the kind of impact of the assumptions and values that we put onto race, the ideas of race, the way that we socialize members of our societies into understandings about race, I think this particular case that I'm going to introduce you to is a really illustrative case in point to understand the kind of impacts of these things. So you'll remember earlier in the course we discussed primary, secondary, and tertiary forms of socialization, how we become inculcated into social norms and shared values and assumptions and expectations. And race is, of course, not exempt from this. And so one of the most interesting ways to kind of understand the I suppose the deep inculcation of race-based ideas and values is to look at how this is manifest in groups of children. So there's been some really interesting research in this particular area. A study in the late 1980s found that from the age of 4, European American children in the US were found to hold negative attitudes towards other kind of racial groups. And so from the age of 4 is really very young. You'd have to think, those kinds of views are coming predominantly probably from family and the community around them, probably also partly from media representations or exposure to kind of wider culture. And then the kind of example that I'd like to focus on is a series of experiments that have been come to have been called the Dole Test. So it started in the 1940s when two psychologists, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, essentially designed and conducted a series of experiments with African American children to try to test the psychological effects of segregation on children. And these experiments have been recreated following the end of segregation. And so similar findings have emerged from the pre and post, not pre, but during and post segregation cases of these particular tests. And I have a video here to show you what these kind of findings are. But essentially in these tests, children are given a black doll and a white doll, and they're asked a series of questions about these two dolls. They're asked, which one is the nice doll? Which doll would you prefer to play with? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which one looks like you? And the children's answers, I think, are incredibly telling of the types of assumptions and ideas about race that they've been socialized into. And I remember when I was in my first year of undergrad, I was shown this particular case, and it always stuck with me. I think because there was something so kind of sad about it, seeing that already children held such kind of deep-seated and like negative views about race and in some ways about themselves. And so I'm going to give you a few minutes to watch this video and have a look at this for yourself. And while you do, please have a think about the where these ideas about race that the children are communicating may have come from, and why so early in their lives these children already are showing these kind of patterns of ideas around race and the kind of values they're putting on to different kind of expressions or appearances of race. So I'll give you a few minutes to have a look at that, and then we can continue on with the next section of the lecture, in which I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of ethnicity.